Obsessed avoidants aren't what you think. They don't chase, they don't confess, and they definitely won't admit that they still have feelings for you. Well, at least not right away. But their obsession always leaks out in 5 specific ways that you'd never expect. So the first leak is that they mimic your unique habits without realizing it. Let's play a game. This is you. You are 9 years old and you've developed your very first crush. This is your crush. They are also 9 years old, and as far as you can tell, they walk on the sun. Everything about them is just so cool. The way they walk, the way they talk, the way they look, what video game they're playing. Without even realizing it, you start copying them. You catch yourself saying the same phrases they use, asking your parents for the same backpack they have, or suddenly loving the same snacks that they bring to lunch. You're not doing it on purpose. It just happens. This is all thanks to something called mirror neurons. Think of this like the copy and paste function of your brain. It fires not just when you do something, but also when you see someone else doing it. It's why you feel the urge to smile when someone smiles at you, or why you pick up on someone else's accent when you spend enough time with them. They're designed to help us bond. So when you actually have feelings for someone, those mirror neurons fire more frequently and more intensely. It's like your brain becomes hyper attuned to them and it picks up on every little idiosyncrasy that they have. And you begin integrating their different qualities into yourself. Keep that in mind as we fast forward to today. Let's say the same thing is happening, except instead of you being a 9-year-old, it is you currently with an avoidant partner that you like a lot. Now, unlike a 9-year-old who doesn't have a filter and has no problem saying, like, I like your backpack, I want a backpack like that, avoidants don't have the tools to tell you that they're thinking about you a lot. Instead, their obsession leaks out in all these subtle ways, like, you guessed it, mirroring your unique habits. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. Check out this little Reddit thread entitled, "Anyone have experience with mirroring by an insecurely attached person?" I'd like to draw your attention to this part. 2 years later, I look at her socials and honestly, I'm quite shocked at how much I feel like she's taken my personality and interests. It's uncanny. Things she couldn't have cared less about while we were together. I was convinced she hated me, so it just doesn't add up. So what's happening here? Well, again, it all ties back to those mirror neurons. Even years after the relationship ended, the likes and interests this person picked up while they were together remain rooted in their subconscious. Mirror neurons are powerful that way. They allow someone to absorb behaviors, habits, and preferences as a form of connection, and sometimes that connection lingers long after the relationship is over. This isn't a direct admission of an avoidant saying, hey, I'm obsessed with you. But then again, this is avoidance we're talking about. That rarely ever happens. Instead, what you're seeing is their subconscious mind holding on to the parts of you or the qualities you have that made them feel something. It's subtle, but once you start noticing it, it's hard to unsee. So the second leak is that they send mixed signals through cryptic messages or likes. Let's talk about accidental breadcrumbings. Yeah, they're no accident. Here's how it works. You're scrolling through your socials, minding your own business, and suddenly, bam, a random like from them on a post you made months ago. Or maybe you get a text that's just vague enough to drive you insane, like, hey, I saw something that reminded me of you. Hope you're good. What does that mean? Why now? Here's the deal. Avoidants are masters of sending cryptic text messages that give you just enough to keep you hooked, but enough to also drive you insane. These breadcrumbs are their way of testing the waters without diving into them. They don't want to risk rejection by outright saying, I've been thinking about you. So instead, they'll drop these little hints and watch how you react. It's all about control. Avoidants, I've noticed, are addicted to this idea of a cup fill. Now, this is a eerily similar concept to narcissistic supply. With narcissists, they always have a form of supply that they need to fill their cup. And once it's filled, they're full and they don't need anything for a little while until their supply needs to get filled again. Avoidants work in a similar way. This is a cup, and for an avoidant, their main goal is to fill the cup to the top. When they're unsure of where they stand with you, their cup feels empty, and that emptiness is deeply uncomfortable for them. So what do? Well, they're going to bait you with mixed signals, a cryptic text, a random like, a vague comment. It's all to see if you'll take the bait and respond. If you do, well, boom, their cup fills up. They feel reassured that you're still interested, still thinking about them, still within reach. But here's the frustrating part. Once their cup is full, they dip out. They disappear until that cup starts to feel empty again, and the cycle repeats. Now, I can already see the people in the comments saying,
"Yeah, but Chris, what does this have to do with obsession? This just seems narcissistic."
And yes, avoidants can be narcissistic, but they can also be obsessed. Think about it. For someone to keep coming back to fill that cup over and over again, it means you're on their mind. If they didn't care, they wouldn't bother baiting you to fill the cup up at all. Their obsession leaks out through these little breadcrumbs, these little tests, because the truth is they can't stop coming back to you. Now, if you think this is wild, wait until you see this next one. The third leak is that they channel their negative emotions elsewhere. You ever heard of the concept of emotional displacement? It's a psychological defense mechanism in which a person redirects a negative emotion from its original source to a less threatening recipient. I've long held a sneaking suspicion that avoidants are masters of redirecting their negative energies onto things to avoid confrontation. This is a little complicated, but imagine for a moment that you're an avoidant. You're feeling something heavy. Maybe it's guilt, loneliness, or even anger after a fight with someone that you care about. But for you, emotions like this are threatening. They signal vulnerability, and vulnerability signals danger. So instead of confronting those feelings or expressing them directly to the person involved, you redirect them. Maybe you dive into work, convincing yourself that you need to get ahead on that project. Or you start a new hobby, obsessively playing guitar, baking sourdough, or even reorganizing your entire closet. Anything to keep your mind occupied. Now here's where things take an interesting turn. If that negative emotion is rooted in your connection with someone specific, let's say a person you're secretly obsessed with, well, it doesn't just disappear. It leaks out. That redirected energy starts to revolve around them in ways you might not expect. Maybe you find yourself angry over something small they said weeks ago, replaying it in your head like a broken record. Or maybe your new hobby just so happens to be something they introduced to you, like a TV show they love or a sport that they're into. The obsession doesn't go away. It just gets channeled somewhere safe. This is emotional displacement at work. The obsession is still there. It's just rooted in things like work and hobbies and whatever, all in an effort to avoid confrontation. Now, the key here is that energy, the emotions, what they're suppressing doesn't really go anywhere. It stays bubbling up inside. And again, they're trying to avoid the confrontation with the person that they secretly are obsessed with. But the very fact that they're channeling so much of their energy into things that are unrelated to this person that they like or are thinking about just really tells you how obsessed they really are of that original source of the energy. So the fourth leak is that they hyper-focus on areas where they can compete with you. All right, it's time to embarrass myself again. In this video, I talked about the very first breakup I ever went through. Basically, how it was a relationship fraught with fighting, anger, and jealousy, and eventually how I said I was done over text, and how I really meant that I was done with the conversation, but my ex thought I was done with the relationship. I didn't correct her. Then I told the story about how I kind of entered this phase where I yearned for her a bit before shaking my head and coming to the conclusion that I was being crazy. There's one more story I didn't tell though. After the breakup, I became obsessed with winning the breakup, and in my 19-year-old pea-sized brain, to me that meant whoever texts the person first loses the battle. I'm not texting her first. I mean, this was a big deal. The two of us were constant texters throughout our relationship, so not texting each other was going to be challenging. A day goes by where I don't text her. A day goes by where she doesn't text me. Oh, she's playing the game. A week goes by. I hold strong. She does too. It's not until about a month and a half later that something actually interesting happens. It's 2008, and Hurricane Ike is barreling down over Texas where I lived at the time. Now, what's special about Ike is the eye went right over the town where we both lived. Needless to say, there's damage. A lot of damage. The hurricane clears out, and lo and behold, I get a text from her. She's checking up on me to see if I am still safe. She still cares, and I win. So avoidants, if they're obsessed with you or thinking a lot about you, they're going to channel that into some sort of competition, much like you saw I did in my story. See, avoidants don't want to move on. They just want to win. They want to come out ahead. Winning to them can mean anything. Who texts who first, outperforming you at work, dating someone else first. I mean, the list can go on and on. Now, it's easy to look at this and suspect malice, but I don't think so. I think it's more about their own internalized fear of inadequacy. Deep down, they're constantly questioning if they're good enough. So by beating you at something, anything, they're subconsciously validating themselves while keeping their obsessions safely hidden. Again, let's use me as an example. When my ex texts me first after the hurricane, my first reaction was she still cared, but also I won. But looking back, it wasn't just a game. It was a way subconsciously for me to realize she still cared about me as much as I cared about her. I just didn't want to have a conversation. I'm an avoidant. Now here's the interesting part. That story I told in the other video, the one where I go walking to go meet her up and then kind of chicken out halfway through, that happens after this Hurricane Ike story. All right, the fifth leak. They experience paradoxical deactivation when you're unavailable. This one's a little complicated to explain, which is why I saved it for last. Hypothetically, let's say that you want to move on from an avoidant. Well, when that happens, an avoidant who is obsessed with you will psychologically go through this very paradoxical tug of war inside of themselves. So they're going to deactivate outwardly, acting distant or indifferent, but they're going to obsess internally. They'll experience intrusive thoughts about losing you and what you might be doing. This is fueled by the avoidant push-pull dynamic. They crave connection, but fear dependence. It's all based on that core wound of needing that independence. But the whole point of this video is to give you specific signs to look for. So what are the signs that they are going through this leak that we're talking about? Well, you're going to want to look for 5 specific tells that this tug of war is happening. And it's all about subtle contradictions in their actions. So the first tell is going to be a sudden spike in attention followed very quickly by distance. When they sense you're becoming unavailable, they might exhibit brief bursts of engagement to pull you back into their orbit. So for example, they may send you a random text asking something mundane like a favorite movie or like an old photo or social media, and after this, they'll retreat again. Then, of course, you'll have increased awareness of your movements. They may casually inquire about your plans or your whereabouts through mutual friends or subtly monitor your social media activity, even if they rarely interact directly. If they're the type to stay silent for weeks, seeing their name pop up in your views or likes is a clue. There could be jealousy masked as disinterest. They may dismissively comment on someone new you're spending time with or downplay the importance of your social activities. This feigned indifference is often a cover for a rising sense of jealousy or a loss of control. There could be uncharacteristic gestures. Avoidants often resist overt emotional displays, but when they're in this paradoxical phase, you might notice small, out-of-character actions like a thoughtful comment or a compliment. These breadcrumbs reveal that they're still emotionally engaged, even if they don't acknowledge it outright. There could be overly detached behavior that feels performative. They might lean into the facade of being unbothered. For example, they may make a point of highlighting how busy or fine they are, but there's an undertone of effort, almost as if they're trying to convince themselves as much as you. Now, what ties all of these signs together? Well, it's all about control. Avoidants don't want to risk the vulnerability of sitting there and saying, I'm still obsessed with you. So it's going to leak out in all of these really odd ways. What's happening here is they're still trying to maintain emotional distance from you whilst at the same time tethering themselves to you. Now here's the poignant part. For avoidants, this tug of war, it's not about you. It's about the conflict within themselves. The fear of losing you battles with the fear of being too close. It's messy, confusing, and undeniably human, but then again, obsession always is.